But the story he shared with me is one that shaped his life. And it was about persistence, because Harvey is one of the most persistent people I know. I have tremendous respect for him. And that story is the story of the stonecutter. His father told him that the reason he would never give up, and the reason his father became so successful, was because he believed in stonecutting. He said, I want you, son, to become a stonecutter as well. He said, what a stonecutter does, he takes his big hammer and he smacks this giant boulder as hard as he can. And he hits it again and again and again and again. And you know what happens? He could hit it 100 times, 200, 300, and not even have a scratch. But he'd keep on doing it. Now, most people say, what are you, an idiot? Can't you see it's not working? But a stonecutter's smart. A stonecutter knows just because you're not getting the feedback you want initially doesn't mean you're not making progress. Pretty good belief to have. He said, you keep hitting and hitting, and at some point, maybe on the second 100, third 100th, maybe on the 1,004th hit, the stone splits open right there. It doesn't just crack. In one hit, it breaks open. And again, it wasn't that hit that did it. It was the constant pressure being applied to the challenge at hand. So Harvey's metaphor for himself is, I'm a stonecutter. That's what makes me successful. That metaphor works for me as well, maybe for you. I know years ago I began to have this belief, and I was explaining to people that it didn't look like I was making progress, but I had my wrench on a fire hydrant, and I was pushing on that thing as hard as I could. And then once it opened, it was just going to keep pouring forever with just tremendous force. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. But that metaphor kept me persistent, kept me going. Your metaphors don't have to be elegant. They just need to be effective in getting you to take action. By the way, whole cultures are shaped by metaphors. A great example is if you decide to go trekking in Nepal and you meet people along the side of the road, strangers, people you've never met before. The one thing you notice most about these people, very much like Fijians, they're incredibly loving people. These huge smiles and this warm welcome you get as if they've known you forever. And you know why? As they call to you, they call out a phrase, which in Nepalese means little brother or big brother. They just decide which one you are. I tend to get to be big brother because of my size most of the time. But whatever it is, little sister or big sister, everyone is addressed as their brother or sister. Would that change the way you approach people if that was the filter you had on every human being you met? See, as a society, we've adopted this idea about 10, 15 years ago of planet Earth or spaceship Earth. That sounded like a great metaphor, but it didn't work. You know why? You can't get emotional about a spaceship. We don't notice, we don't treat the Earth when we think of it as a spaceship the way we do when we look at it as, let's say, Mother Earth. What if you thought that everything that you received in your life, you're receiving from the breast of your Mother Earth? And that's what was nourishing your family. Some of you are like raising an eyebrow right now, but it's a different metaphor, isn't it? You'd probably be a little more sensitive. You probably wouldn't put some toxic waste right on your mother's breast, would you? You'd probably think a little different first. We've got to be really careful. We've got to think long-term in the development of our metaphors, not short-term. In fact, most boats or ships, as well as aircraft, we usually relate to them or describe them as a she, not a he. We have female names for them, or we say, take good care of her. Why do we say her? Why don't we say, take care of him? Or, take care of Joe here, my boat. We might treat it a little different, right? I slap the thing around a little bit, but no, not a she. We're delicate. We caress her. We take care of her. We nurture her. The metaphor works. It enhances that area of life. And there are many cultures, not just the country you live in, but what you do for a living provides another culture with different metaphors. For example, oftentimes lawyers have some challenges in their personal lives and can't imagine why when they come home and try and apply the same metaphors that they use at work at home. They start to have a conversation with their wife or their husband, and next thing you know, they're trying to find out what's wrong with their argument and what their evidence is for backing up what they've said, and they try to have a debate. And that doesn't work too well in a personal relationship. Or I'll never forget working one time with a couple, one of whom was a quarterback, a star quarterback in the NFL. And he was dating and considering marrying, and she him, a woman who was a pretty powerful movie star. And they had all these problems in their relationship, and most of them seemed to be coming from his upsets. He was upset with her all the time because she was breaking his rules. And almost all of them, though, came into focus as soon as I realized, wait a second, this guy is a quarterback. What are the rules for someone, metaphorically, who's playing a game constantly where they're a quarterback? Well, number one is you got to run the show. You call the plays. People respond to you. You're the director. You're making things happen. And as you're moving up to become the best, you have to be the star. Even though everyone else needs to be a star too, they need to be a star with you. And so the bottom line is this person going off on her own, deciding what she wanted for her life and how she was going to be, and her being a star without having to catch a pass from him. That didn't go over too big with him. It created a lot of challenges. Or an example would be a jet pilot I did some work with. This guy is always finding something wrong with people. He's always seemed to get himself into fights. And the reason was he thrived on having an enemy. Without an enemy, there was no way he could really be the best he could be. Or maybe one of my favorites, because it was so simple to make a change in, was this man who was so disassociated. His family members and his kids just couldn't get through to him, didn't feel connected to him, and they really resented him because he didn't give any feelings and he was always directing them. And you know what he was? An air traffic controller. As an air traffic controller, he had to make himself not be stressed. He had to stay disassociated. The guy on the radio heard his voice going, okay, well, just keep circling around for another couple of hours. It'll be okay. That wouldn't have gone over too big, right? So you learn to, when there's a trouble, say, yes, just make a circle and I'll get back to you. That certain disassociated fashion works wonderful there. It doesn't work at home. So we got to be careful that we don't carry the metaphors that work in one context, like the environment we work in, into another context, like our relationships or our businesses or our families or our friends. So what are some of the metaphors that you use daily in your day-to-day life without thinking about it? Do any of them come from your work, for example? Or do you describe yourself in ways like I'm burnt out versus maybe you could have something like I'm recharging? Or do you get upset and say it's an eye for an eye? Maybe you need to come up with a different metaphor, one that's less intense. Or instead of feeling like you've got a mountain full of work to do or millions of things to do, maybe you've got a few things to do and you start taking that mountain and representing it as a stack. Maybe that'd feel a little different. You want to make sure you set yourself up to win the game. And the way to win the game is pick the right metaphor. Let's take a second look at relationships. What are the metaphors you have for relationships? Is the person you're in a relationship with your partner in life? Are they your team member? Are they your lover? Are they your better half? Or do you talk about them as your dictator, the old ball and chain, the old lady, the old man, that jerk and idiot I live with? Do you think those metaphors might make a difference in how they feel? I'll never forget, I had this one lady in a Date with Destiny seminar. Every time she talked about her husband, she'd talk about this jerk I'm with, this idiot. And so I turned to her and I said, ma'am, I'm sure you have a lot of challenges and I'm sure this man has made a lot of mistakes. And I know you haven't made any. But I'm just curious. Do you think your relationship's going to get any better as long as you hold that he's a jerk and an idiot? I said, also, notice what's happening here. You call him a jerk and idiot. And the times he's talked about you, I hear him say things like, you're the love of his life, or you're his better half, or you're his gift from God. Maybe you ought to re-examine the metaphor you're using to describe him to yourself and to other people and pick something that's more appropriate. Because sometimes we use a metaphor so often it becomes habitual, and we start thinking the metaphor is real, and it's just not. How about kids? What are your metaphors for your kids? Are they the Rugrats? One of my friends who obviously doesn't have kids used to have a metaphor. He called them barfers. Because all kids do. Whenever you're around, they barf all over you. So as long as you hold that metaphor, can you imagine how he responded? He just recently, by the way, got to fill in for Santa Claus at a department store, and he didn't want to do it. A bunch of us put him up to it and set him up so he had to do it. He got to have hundreds of these barfers come and sit on his lap. And you know what? Most of them, with one exception, didn't barf. And the bottom line is he got a whole nother view of what children are about. And he got to change his metaphor. And now he calls them cuddlies. And even get might change the way you feel? You better believe it. Brats doesn't usually make you want to have more of them, nor does it make you want to take good care of them or nourish them. So you got to really make sure you got the appropriate metaphor in each area. Now, how about the metaphors for your body? What is your body? Is it a machine? Is it a disaster? Is it an opportunity for growth? Is it a vehicle? Is it the temple? See, most people don't treat it like it's a temple. I can tell you, in Date with Destiny recently, last November, about 90 days ago, this is January when I'm chatting with you here, there was a gentleman who we learned to call Maestro, because in Date with Destiny, we have people adopt a metaphor for how they want people to respond to them and treat them during the weekend. And Maestro was just this wonderful guy who was extremely overweight. They've been trying to lose weight through every diet you can imagine. But when I got him up on stage and we did one of these things I call the rules realignments, a special technique we have for changing the rules that your brain uses to make decisions, as we got through it, it became clear that he associated being fat to being spiritual. Because he had all these metaphors of that in order to be spiritual, what you had to do is be like the giant guru, in India. And so sure enough, he actually linked that to being more. And he thought, if you're this big, then the only people that are going to get through to you are spiritual people because other people are going to be turned off by your fat. And he said, I really think that, he said, I know it doesn't make any sense, but he says, it just feels real to me that fat equals spiritual. And so I gave him a metaphor. I said, well, I don't think that. He said, I think God loves fat people. I said, well, I think God loves everybody, but I think what he does with fat people is he sticks them on a skewer and roasts them above hell. You should have seen his face. Now, obviously, I don't believe this, but it was a major pattern for him. And he got the picture in his head. It was pretty intense. And we began to work on a better metaphor for his body because he said his body was nothing. So, well, what is your body? What's it like? He said, it's like nothing. It's like just there. It's just a vehicle. I said, is it a quality vehicle? He said, well, it doesn't matter if you have quality vehicles as long as it gets you there. So we got him to adopt the idea of a temple. And you know what? That was the only major change. With that, a bunch of his rules changed. Because when he went to pick up food, he said, would I put this in a temple? Because he's really a wonderfully beautiful spiritual man. He even began to change the music he listened to. He used to listen to some music so loud that everybody around him was concerned he was hurting his eardrums. And he came back, and he's come back to several Date with Destinies as a support staff. And he said that, he doesn't even listen to the same music because he says, is that really doing my temple any good? He said, I want to take care of my temple. By the way, he's lost 90 pounds in the last 90 days simply by adopting that metaphor and adopting it fully. I mean, living it every single day. It's become habitual to him. And he said that once in a rare while, if he finds himself going down an old aisle that used to be familiar, he just pictures that body on a skewer above hell. And he said that's all it takes is a metaphor to knock him right out of it and get him out of those aisles he doesn't belong in. One of the most important distinctions that I made about global metaphors, having utilized them so much and worked with people on an ongoing basis, is that whether people know it or not, they've got global metaphors for themselves. They have metaphors for what they do for a living. And the challenge is if you don't consciously select your own metaphors, then what happens is your environment tends to create the metaphors for you. And sometimes those metaphors are disempowering, not empowering.